The Nets have a new coach. The Nets have a big offseason ahead of them. The Nets have a lot going on. And we've got CJ Holmes from New York Daily News here to talk about it all. Going to break down the coaching hire. Going to break down what might be happening for the Nets going forward. But first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Doug Norrie. Get done with that introduction. No Adam Armbrecht on the show today. Massive upgrade, as we say always when we have guests on the show, and that's because CJ Holmes joins us from the New York Daily News, where he has been covering the Brooklyn Nets for better, but a lot of times worse for the team all season long. CJ, man, how's it going? Excited to talk to you today.
It's going great, man. It's a beautiful off-season Tuesday. Sun is shining. Can't complain about anything.
Real quick, I didn't ask you that. I actually meant to ask you this as we were leading in, and I didn't. Were you at the Garden on Monday night?
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, okay, shoot. I meant to ask you this on the thing. Quick, I know this is a Nets podcast, but quick thoughts about a team that's actually rolling in the way that the Nets wanted to roll, and also just watching like one of the crazier comeback, literally pulled it out from nowhere games at the end there.
I'll start with this. That really sucks for the 76ers. In a lot of ways, that was one of their best shots. So you're going to see this series. I think it was like 35 for Maxey, 34 for Embiid. You get Brunson shot like 8 for 26, right? That's a formula that's usually conducive to winning, but got to execute down the stretch there. You can say what you want about the officiating, but you got to get that ball in, got to secure it, got to hit 2 free throws. You got to get out of there if you're the 76ers. But as far as the Knicks, they stole one. They stole game 2 at home, 2-0 heading back to Philadelphia. And, they're in a position to control. They're in control of this series. The thing is, though, you got to get Jalen Brunson going. There's not a lot of creators on that team. Guys like Dante DiVincenzo, Deuce off the bench, Bogdanovich. Those are guys who, even Josh Hart. These are guys who benefit off of, Brunson's penetration and paint touches and kickouts and things of that nature. Now, granted, a guy like Josh Hart, he's stepped up so much through these first 2 games. If you ask me, he's been the Knicks' MVP, which is crazy to say, right?
Yeah.
But at some point they're gonna have to get more out of Brunson. That home court advantage is gonna shift, right? It's gonna be a lot louder in there on a Thursday night. So hopefully Brunson steps up to the plate, plays well, because 2-0 sounds nice, but the series is far from over.
Yeah, it was just like sort of like this one of the things that Nets fans look across town and just like you see that MSG kind of like just the place is absolutely going crazy. So I was like, yeah, from someone that was in the room, feels pretty cool. If you haven't been reading CJ, he's been covering the Nets all year for the Daily News, formerly with The Athletic, formerly with the San Francisco Chronicle, where he covered the Warriors too. So the guy has probably needs no introduction, but just in case, been running the different NBA beats here for a while. Wanted to get him on because he wrote a couple really, really cool pieces over the last couple weeks. Specifically, the first one we wanted to talk about was about the hiring of Jordi Fernandez and sort of what Fernandez brings to the table when it comes to the Nets. If you have not seen this, I'll put the link in the show notes. It's over in the Daily News. I would really encourage everyone to read it, but we'll roll through some of the stuff here because even reading it, sometimes when you assistant coaches, it's kind of hard to get to know them, right? Like they kind of sit on end of benches and it's hard to exactly know, but CJ gives some cool background about Fernandez and, on learning about him and interviewing guys from like Impact Basketball, like sort of like, what were some of your big takeaways? We'll go through some of the other stuff he's going to bring to the table, but like, what were some big takeaways you had sort of learning about Fernandez's trip to this place with the Nets?
Well, let me start by saying this. Jacques Vaughn, Kevin Ollie, I think those guys did the best of the situation that they were given. As we all know, obviously the Nets decided to go in a different direction. They wanted a fresh start and put someone in this head coaching position who I agree can grow with this young roster, right? Fernandez is a guy who's a basketball fanatic, right? I didn't report on this, but he was a name I heard involved with the Nets' coaching search 2-3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago. So this is a guy they've been zeroing in on for a while now. And, I know there's a lot of fans who wanted a more veteran coach like Mike Budenholzer, right, to come in and take over the reins. But, in the process of learning about Fernandez, I'm more and more sold that he is the right guy for the job. And he's a guy who can help turn things around in Brooklyn. This guy is a basketball lifer. He's been coaching since he was 15 years old, involved with, pro teams overseas. Then you got Coach Joe at Impact. He's been there a long time, owner and everything. Takes a trip out to Spain to train Rudy Fernandez. And, here's this young kid that's, doing everything that's asked of him and being helpful and being present. And it impressed him so much, he invited to come work out to come help workouts at Impact Academy. And it's the same thing. And that's kind of like the common theme with him. He's a guy who's going to do whatever he can to, improve and absorb information, right? He's a guy that's going to do whatever is asked of him, right? He's a guy that's extremely level-headed, right? And those qualities and that hunger, that desire to improve, it's why he has, risen up the coaching ranks so rapidly. It's why he was selected as the best assistant coach in the NBA entering the season. Those are infectious qualities. And nowadays in the NBA, and not just the NBA, professional sports in general, right? It's so important to create an environment that people want to be a part of, right? And, you heard testaments from De'Aaron Fox and Harrison Barnes during their play-in series against the Pelicans. This is a guy that players love. This is a guy who, even when he's gotten his coaching opportunities, in terms of like summer league, right? He's impressed with the rosters he's been given, right? And, all those factors kind of rolled into one. I think that's why the Nets wanted to take a chance on this guy. Is he proven? No, not necessarily, right? He's never been a head coach in the NBA, but he did lead Canada to a bronze medal in FIBA. He has been a head coach at the G League level. He has been a head coach at the international level. And they see him as a guy who has the intangibles first, basketball mind second, and third, someone who this young roster can really grow with, and he can kind of imprint himself on, right? Create that culture that people want to be a part of. You say that, a lot of fans say the Nets want to go star hunting this summer, right? If you want to attract stars to Brooklyn, like I said, you have to have a culture that people want to be a part of. And from all accounts, Jordi Fernandez is that guy.
Yeah, reading your piece, I was like, we did a whole show about, before they had done the hiring, about wanting Coach Bud and thinking he was like the best person, best person for the job. And some of that is just like in the not knowing what you don't know, right? Like, so it's like hard to know about some of these guys till you see and read pieces like the one you wrote and some other people that have written sort of some stuff about Fernandez. But after reading your piece and just talking about how Joe Abernathy like sort of talked about him, and then the grind that he's like, you just can't fake that. When you said, he hasn't proven it, I kind of was going to just jump in and disagree with you and be like, I don't know, man, he's kind of proven a decent amount here. Like, it seems to have been proven.
You get where I was going, though.
Exactly. Like, he's proven as much. It would seem that he's proven as much as you can possibly prove, short of just being the head coach, right? Like,
and now that NBA sideline is a different monster.
Totally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when the buck stops with you, people can change. I totally, there's really no way to replicate that. You can't really live test it until you do it. It's like when you create like software or something. It's like well, we'll live test it as much as we can. Then when 1 million people get their hands on it, then we'll kind of know where all the bugs are. I mean, that's sort of what you are with this and this. But so reading your piece, I kind of thought, I don't know, man, this is pretty close to as proven as it gets. I have a couple more questions about Jordi Fernandez, and I have want to talk about Cam Thomas to a piece you wrote there. We will get to that in 1 second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Look, Prize Picks is daily fantasy made So easy. All you're doing on Prize Picks, you're going more or less on the player projections that they have, and they got everything over there: basketball, hockey, baseball, even League of Legends. If you're getting into the video game space, it's all there for you on Prize Picks. You can win up to 100 times your money with few as 4 correct picks. That's just turning $10 into $1,000 for all you math majors out there. Like I said, with Prize Picks, you're just going more or less in their projections. You're not wrangling with salaries. More with basketball, it's just points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals, all the stats that you love, and then all the stats that you love for every other sport as well. They've really made this as easy as possible. All you're doing on Prize Picks, you're downloading the app using the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, download the app, use the code LOCKEDONNBA. First deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It is that easy. Final thoughts on Jordi Fernandez before we move into some of the other guys who are going to be actually on the court for the Brooklyn Nets. Him walking in the door here, do you see this move? You know, you mentioned the star power piece of it. Do you think that, you know, this is the kind of guy that is going to be able to establish that kind of culture? I mean, like people talk in Nets world, I mean, they can't stop talking about culture. Now, whether or not it's always, they're always able to produce it, it's been, that's been a topic of conversation, but clearly that's something they want to do. Do you think that he is like that kind of guy that can do it? Like, do you think that he's commanded, you know, enough respect, you know, coaching SGA and guys like that at Team Canada, and just sort of like you talked in your piece about, you know, even working with guys like Serge Ibaka and that he's worked with a lot of these guys through the years. Like, does it seem to you that he is, I guess I'm just asking if you thought he was the right choice as like a final thought here?
I think he is, for a lot of the factors that we already discussed. I mean, for young guys like, you know, Cam Thomas, you know, Trendon Watford, if he comes back, these young guys on the roster who, you know, have holes in their game that, you know, a lot of people say, oh, if they, you know, if Trendon Watford extends his range, or, you know, if Cam Thomas can become more efficient, whatever it is, right? Whatever it is, having a coach come in who has a history of working with different players in the player development space, years of that kind of history, I mean, that should be music to those young guys' ears. So the ability to take, you know, these young players to the next level, coupled with, you know, that relationship building aspect of it, I think it can create a culture that people want to be a part of, whether that, you know, rakes in, you know, free agents next off season. We don't know yet, right? But the first thing he has to do is he has to come in and he has to just establish that, get this team playing an exciting brand of basketball again. That's the first thing. You do that and the stars will come. It's New York City, right? Get a guy in here who can cultivate talent, get these guys playing hard, winning basketball, and people are going to want to be a part of that. Especially when you have a coach that, you know, hangs his hat on building relationships with people, you know, being out there in that way.
You wrote a piece called That's Cam Thomas made the most of his third NBA season. Now he wants respect. So you mentioned there about Fernandez coming in here and working with that, I mean, clearly with everybody, but Cam Thomas seems to be sort of like the player du jour around where the most disagreement probably lies, right? In terms of the fan base, maybe even just NBA writ large too, around like disagreement around what his game is. And you wrote a really good piece about just him talking about sort of how he saw that this season was a stepping stone season, maybe more akin to a first season for him than a third season, if I'm just like trying to sum it up quickly there. But what are your thoughts, just with no other introduction on it, what are your thoughts on Cam Thomas as his, like, after having watched him this whole year, and, you know, whether you saw growth there and like sort of like what you think his game could and should become going forward?
Yeah, I mean, Cam Thomas's upside is quite the divisive topic, you know, especially here in Brooklyn. But, you know, while Cam isn't perfect, whatever that means, I think he's one hell of a player because, you know, I'm the type of guy, just, you know, when I'm evaluating, you know, my eye test is the dude knows how to get a bucket, and that's 50% of this game, right? Putting the ball in the hole, and he does it at an extremely high level, and he's only gotten better as the year has gone on. And he's only, 21, 22 years old. He has such a long road ahead of him. And, you know, he's averaging 20-plus points in the NBA on higher efficiency than a lot of stars around the league that are drooled over. And, you know, the thing is, Cam feels like he deserves that same kind of respect too. Now, a lot of that comes with winning games, right? That's one of the big knocks on basketball, on Cam. Can his play translate to, consistent winning basketball? Can he be a true number 1, number 2 option on a contending team? And I think he can be that guy. Obviously, it's going to come down to, how hard Cam works. And, a lot of it's going to have to come from him if he wants to reach that ceiling. But, just seeing the strides that he's made for a guy who could barely get off the bench his first 2 years in the league, to be thrown into the fire. 1 second he's a starter, next second he's a reserve. And through all of that, his play still remained fairly steady this season. And you saw the improvement. And that's even with him having to miss extended time earlier in the year. I am pro Cam Thomas. I don't get how, and there's a lot of people out here who can write off a 22-year-old who really just played his rookie season in the NBA. I think Cam Thomas can be as good as he wants to be, and I think that a coach like Jordi Fernandez can help, unlock that and bring it out of him.
We would joke on the podcast at times where we would say, like, Cam Thomas became sort of a polarizing figure in the Nets landscape, mostly because the rest of the team was so uninteresting. Like everyone else, it wasn't really that interesting to talk about anything else. So then, therefore, sort of the beats of fandom end up being, well, I must disagree about something. And so when nothing else is interesting, then Cam Thomas, who is, very interesting, especially when you think about his upside or what people perceive to be his weaknesses on the court, let's say. I think he was as much of a victim of that as anything else. Frankly, like sort of the rest of the roster. If you saw a place where maybe he isn't now, but could be, is there like a part of his game that you like going into next year? Let's say there's like growth is linear. Is there a place with his game that you think that he could, like, if he can do X, then Y will happen, right? Like if he can do this, then we'll know he's reached the next level. Or do you think it's just like going to be like a natural progression, like score more, have more confidence, or is like a part of his game that you could see sort of like even unlocking him even more?
Not necessarily scoring. I think the scoring will just continue to get better and better the longer he's in the league. The more reps he gets at this level. But it's the other things that everyone wants to see, right? They want to see that he can be a plus player at both ends of the court. I mean, Cam Thomas is built like a linebacker, right? Yeah. He is one of the strongest young guards I've seen. And, with those physical tools, you should use that to his advantage at the defensive end of the court, right? I think people want to see more of a motor at that end of the court. Another thing in terms of his offense is using the gravity he creates as a scorer to make the players around him better. When talking to Cam towards the end of the season, earlier in the year, do you remember when the Nets played the Hawks in Atlanta, that game where they were blitzing him left and right?
Yeah, it was the first time they did it. It was the first time. It was the first time it was the first time he ever saw like a hard double and a hard blitz, and it was like it really, really stood out. Mm-hmm. Yes, I remember. We remember that. Yeah,
it was like one of his worst games of the season. Totally.
Yeah.
Looking back on it, it's a badge of honor because when teams are starting to blitz you like that, you're doing something right, and they want you to get the ball out of your hands at all costs. And 2, he learned from that. He was like Tony Stark, right? He learned from his mistake. It wasn't perfect as the year went on, but over the last couple of months of the season, you saw a slow uptick in assists. He's starting to make those reads. He's starting to see, 2 plays ahead, right? And those are only things that, you can only practice that kind of stuff so much. Yeah, you can run shell drills and practice all the live long day, but until you get out there and you're experiencing it, with the NBA speed and NBA athletes out there guarding you, it's hard to get a feel for it. But, slowly but surely as his year has gone on, he's gotten a feel for it. And I think that's an area he'll continue to improve on. Talking to the story I wrote after the season, that's one thing he said. He says, I just want to be better at, making the guys around me better. I just want to be better at, making reads, making the right reads every time. Because, the best point guards and the best guards in this game, they make the right read 9 times out of 10. And when Cam Thomas gets to that level, I feel like, the entire league will truly see what kind of offensive talent he can actually play.
And his reads, I mean, honestly, too, his reads are more important, right? Because like when you have the ball in your hand, like your read and react. It's actually worth more. Like it's higher leverage reads than, standing in the corner as like a weak side shooter and just kind of waiting. You're either shooting or you're not, right? Like, but I'm really glad you brought up that moment too, because it's easy to forget that, because he did progress as the season went on to the point where he didn't see it as often because he worked his way out of it quicker, right? Like, wouldn't you say that you could see where he would get guys into the short roll easier just because he was like, oh, I can see this coming.
Yeah, and to the point where even towards the end of the season, Kevin Ollie said he had no problem playing Cam at point guard.
Yeah.
And it's because Cam earned that through his development throughout the season. He earned the right to go out there and experience that and make those mistakes and play through those mistakes and learn. And that's what it's going to take. Whether he's a 1 or a 2, making those kind of reads is, obviously extremely important to the success of, any team, any player offensively. And I do think that Cam is a good student of the game. And I think next year you're going to see him making those right plays far more often than we saw in his first 3 seasons.
Totally agree. Got a couple more questions here for CJ about the Nets offseason, which is come into question a little bit about what they're going to do here. We'll get into that here in a second. I'll let you know this show is sponsored by our friends over at BetterHelp. Look, right, we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest, big or small. Certain things can really just start to get to you. It's important to let it out. It's especially important to let it out to someone who's unbiased in your life that can listen, help you give advice, but mostly just help you work through the things, like I said, big or small, that might be bothering you, or even things that are going really well. Kind of, look, the positives and negatives are all the things you want to bring out there in therapy. That is where BetterHelp can jump in. Look, you want to be authentically sad. You want to be upset. You want to be excited. These are all places where BetterHelp can jump in and help work with you. They're going to help match you with a therapist that's just right for you. You can switch at any time. If you find one that's not going to work with you, you can just work on your schedule as well. This is all about you when it comes to BetterHelp therapy. It can be different for everyone. Sometimes it's those bigger problems. Sometimes it's the smaller ones. It all is on the table. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give it BetterHelp a try. Entirely online, designed to be flexible, suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And when you're done with that, go visit our friends over at Monopoly Go. You got a competitive side. We all do. Got to get in on Monopoly Go. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. Great twist of Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards, crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you money. The best part's messing with your friends as well. You can charge them rent on those iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly. And you can heist their vaults for riches. Grab that for yourself. Jump up the leaderboard. Become that Monopoly tycoon you always wanted to be. It's not just the competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends as well. Get in the game. Join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. All right, Nets off season. In some ways, it's like I don't know if the Nets. Okay, let me put it this way. I'll put it to you. Nets off season. Big moves or holding pattern. Let's just start there on a high level. Like, do you think that we see a team that looks markedly different next year, or do you think we have a lot of the same faces coming in the door? I'm going to ask you about a couple of specific players here in a second, but like just on a high level, if you had to predict sort of like the ground shift and whether or not it's going to be of a high or low magnitude for the Nets offseason, how do you see it kind of unfolding?
I mean, unless like a, top tier player like Giannis or somebody, miraculously becomes available this offseason, I don't see the Nets pushing too hard into bringing in star players this offseason, because I do think they'll be in better position financially next offseason to go star hunting if that's so what they choose to do. However, I do think that they keep some of these guys in-house that are set to hit free agency here in the next couple months. Obviously, Nic Claxton, big man in the middle. He's going to be the first domino to fall. From everything I'm hearing, the team wants to bring him back. Obviously they're going to have to move some things around to make that happen. Find a suitable deal that works for both parties. But if you looked at that game against Toronto, now granted Toronto was depleted, but to see that front court of Claxton and Clowney in that defensive dominance, and sit back and say, you know what? Nah, let's break that up. I don't think you can. I don't think you can do that, right? Claxton, they've let a lot of homegrown center talent walk out the door. Jared Allen probably being the most notable of the bunch. But I think Claxton's a guy who loves it here in New York, big on fashion. I don't think he'd want to leave unless he just got an offer from another team he absolutely cannot refuse. So I do think they lock up Claxton. I would love to see a guy like Dennis Smith Jr. back, but such an up and down season, right? Like a lot of guys on this list. He's a real culture guy. Can really spearhead this team defensively on the perimeter when he's locked in and healthy and engaged. Only issue is he did have health problems this year, and bringing in Dennis Schroeder certainly doesn't help him, especially if Ben Simmons is supposed to be a part of the fold at point guard going in the next year. I mean, it just doesn't leave a lot of minutes to be had for a guy like Dennis Smith. And while I'm sure he's at the end of the day happy being on the roster, he comes across as someone who strives to be more than that. So I guess we'll see what happens with him. Lonnie Walker, right? Another guy who's had a up and down season. Beginning of the year, six man. He's in the running for six man of the year. When I first got on the beat, he was leading the league in 20-point games off the bench.
It's crazy, man. Yeah, like effectively buried by the end of the year, though. So it's it's hard to know with him, right?
Yeah, it's hard to know with him, but based on how the year ended for him, I doubt he'll be back. Yeah. Especially it seemed like when the Nets were healthy, maybe it was just the way Ollie wanted to coach the team, but there weren't a lot of lineups where he exactly fit, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And his poor shooting, that kind of spoke for itself. Then you got a guy like Trendon Watford. I think he's probably the last big name free agent in terms of guys in house, and I think that he's the type of guy who could probably be had on a team friendly deal, and why not? I think guys who have versatility the way Watford does, I think they should be coveted in this league. Yeah. Especially those point forward types, and I really like the upside of his game. Again, he showed that he could shoot the three ball towards the end of the season. Just out there playing hard as hell, right? And his versatility really makes him such an asset. I would have liked to see him, get more minutes throughout the entire season rather than just at the end. Maybe that's on Vaughn, but he's a guy who, when I was covering the Warriors, Steve Kerr called a guy like Draymond Green a connector, right? A guy whose versatility would allow different lineups to work. And I think Trendon Walker is one of those guys. And if he could be had on a fair, friendly deal, then I say bring him back.
And that was sort of what they were missing all year too, like the connection piece. Like it seemed like they were going to rely on Simmons to do it, and he clearly really couldn't be relied on. But just a guy, not even an offensive organizer as much as a connector is just the perfect word for it, frankly. Just like a person that can play kind of with everybody theoretically, and can also just make the right reads along the way. And that, I don't know, this roster had a lot of holes, but that clearly was one of them. Real quick, Ben Simmons. I don't really want to spend too much time on this one because we're going to run out of time here, but do you think he's on the team all the way through the end of next year, or do you think they find a landing spot for him? I almost want to stop short about whether he can make an impact, because I personally, if you think he can, please jump it. I put that as option 3, but I've kind of moved past that as a realistic on the wish list. But how do you see this ending? I guess I'll put it that way.
Well, I mean, a fully healthy, motivated Ben Simmons is still a very dangerous player in this league. Obviously, the big question is, will he ever be able to, play a full season? No, and not a full season. No one plays a full season these days, right? But can you play 80% of a season, 82% of a season? And he still has to answer that question. But that expiring contract that he's on, when you talk about moving around pieces to be able to, bring some stars in, flip a sign and trade or something of that nature. Simmons' expiring contract makes him, a prime candidate to be moved at some point. God. It's tough just simply because I think of more from more of an optimistic view. I'm like, well, the guy can stay healthy. Then, I mean, why would the Nets want to get him? But, we'll see. But if you have to, ask me now, I think he's moved before the trade deadline next season.
All right. I think that's fair. It's a hard one because I'm totally with you. You want to go glass half
Yeah.
more than half full because it makes the team better. And at the same time, everyone that's realistic just kind of pauses for a second because it just hasn't everyone hasn't happened. Final question. Mikael Bridges obviously struggled relative to expectations over the last, I'll call it last third of the year, but we could probably say like last half of the year. Do you think the Bridges, which do you think is closer to reality? The Bridges that we saw for the final 20 plus games at the end when he was traded from Phoenix and to start the season last year too, or this player that we saw in the final third-ish of the season who became, I mean, kind of just more of like a 3-and-D guy, and that was it, right? Like he just, a lot of the scoring really dipped, and actually his shot profile actually kind of reverted back to mostly just shooting threes. Which one do you think is closer to reality going forward with Mikael Bridges? Do you think it was a blip, the drop-off that we saw for him, or do you think the expectations were just too high coming off of that like kind of insane run that he had when he first came over from Phoenix?
I don't think it has anything to do with expectations or the guy being burnt out, like a lot of people say. A change of scenery does something to a player, right? I mean, look at Dennis Schroeder, a guy who's been a average 3-point shooter at best, right? Comes to Brooklyn and all of a sudden you can't go under screens anymore, right? Yeah. Sometimes that change of scenery can, bring, something different out of a player for a while, right? But, at some point it's going to regress to the mean, and Mikael Bridges' mean is still a pretty good NBA player. He's not a number 1 or number 2 option. He's never been that at any point in his career. Even at Villanova, his buddies across the street at Madison Square Garden, they were more so running the show. Bridges was playing with a 2-time National Player of the Year and Jalen Brunson. That was Brunson's show. In Phoenix, it was Chris Paul and Devin Booker's show, right? And what made Bridges so effective was, 1, his defensive effort, and 2, his ability to run in transition, his ability to, knock down those corner threes, his ability to move around and cut and get easy finishes at the rim and things of that nature. However, Mikael Bridges was put into a situation on this Brooklyn roster that was poorly built and asked to do more. And for a while, he did that. But, eventually game plans are going to catch up to him, right? And all of a sudden, those shots that are easy to get in September aren't as easy to get come February, March. Mikael Bridges needs some help, right? I do agree with the Nets' line of thinking when saying that Bridges is a piece to build with. He's not the piece to build around, but he's a damn good piece to build with. Schroeder was great, but hopefully Cam Thomas makes another leap next year. Whether it's Dennis Schroeder or someone they bring in this offseason, they definitely need another consistent scoring threat to help take some of the pressure off Mikael. But he's not towards the end of the season at that point. I don't want to say the guy was giving up, but at that point it's like what do I have to play hard for, right?
No, he kind of said it himself. He said it, didn't say it. I mean, like he said it in athlete speak, but I think we all could kind of like read what he was saying.
Yeah, but get this guy some help, build a more stable roster, and I think everyone's going to see once again appreciate the value that he brings to an NBA roster.
All right, the great CJ Holmes from New York Daily News covering the Nets, as good in the business. I love that. Nets had a down season, but not from a coverage standpoint. And the Nets fans are really lucky. We have some of the best writers, I think, around just to be able to read this stuff on a daily basis. CJ, obviously one of them. Really appreciate your time, man. Hopefully we can do it again.
Yes, love to do it soon. Thanks for having me.
All right. And make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to the podcast. Make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. I always get to the end of the podcast. It's always up to Adam Armbrecht to come up with one of the quotes from the all-time great poets. We'll just call CJ Holmes one of the all-time great American poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.